Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 45th chapter in the book of Genesis. This is what I like to call a conflict resolution chapter, the conflict of which begins really in the 37th chapter when we read of Joseph, who is the favorite son of Jacob, the father of the Hebrew nation. And his brothers are envious, and they ultimately enslave him. So there's two individuals I want to really project the picture of Joseph to. One is Abraham, and more specifically the fulfillment of his promise to be a blessing unto all the nations. And we'll get to that beginning in the 5th chapter, but also as a typological allusion to Yahshua, who is the ultimate fulfillment of the Abrahamic blessing. So all the nations and all the times and all the ages will be blessed through his more future descendant. But in the meantime, we have this little display of who he is when he blesses all the nations, and his role and position of authority are are exalted above those of his brothers. He has a dream in the 37th chapter where the 12 stars will bow and surrender before him, bow to them, and these are likened to the father and the brothers, and they don't like that too much. And but the other thing is there's a Cain and Abel dynamic from Genesis, from the beginning to the end. So the first brothers, Cain and Abel, was envious, and he slew him out in the open field. He was jealous because his sacrifice was acceptable to Yahweh, whereas his was rejected, and he warned him that sin was lurking at his door, but he lashes out, and nevertheless his seed perpetuates the earth, but it is all wiped out in the flood and the judgment. But the even post-diluvian, the brotherly dynamic, now these are the brothers of this exalted nation for this exalted person, and this sibling rivalry. Now prior to this point, we don't read of too many brothers. There was Isaac and Ishmael, but they never grew up together. Then there was Jacob and Esau, and they kind of struggled between themselves. And now there's these 12 of them, so the combined collective envy of all the others compels the brothers to send him into slavery. And the other picture I want to present of Joseph's story in the book of Genesis is that of providence. So he rises from the prison to the palace. Now he is originally enslaved to a man by the name of Potiphar. He's the Pharaoh's guard, and his wife Joseph is physically attractive, so she tries to seduce him. He rejects her advances, and then she cries rape, and because she's his master, her word, puts him in prison. And then he meets these two bakers, or a baker and a baker with a dream, of that which he interprets, which means that he's going to live, and his counterpart, the other person who's in there for doing something similar in Pharaoh's service, would die. And he tells him to mention his name, his powers to Pharaoh. And when Pharaoh needs him sometime after, when he's visited by a dream, this cupbearer remembers Joseph, and then he interprets the dream, develops a long-range strategic plan in response to the prophecy. So there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. They are at year 2 in the 45th chapter. So because the global famine, which Joseph had predicted after 7 years of plenty, was in effect now, the people of Canaan, which were his family, to the northeast would be starving for food, and they would have known that Egypt had a plan. So Egypt functioned at the breadbasket of the world, and it was all through Joseph's plannings. And he uses a lot of his leverage. He accuses them of he recognizes them, they don't recognize him, and because he uses the advantage of his position to sort of toy with them, so he sends Judah back to fetch Benjamin, and then he plots. He arranges it so it looks like Benjamin stole a cup, and thereby imprisoning him. And then the conflict is resolved when he reveals himself and his identity and offers his forgiveness. So that the opening verse reads, "And Joseph was unable to restrain himself before all those who stood in him, and he called out, 'Have everyone go from me.' So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers." So he clears out the room. He is a man of prestige and influence who is accompanied by courtiers wherever he go. He's in the positions of of influence, and he would have been surrounded by minions of the Pharaoh because he was the Pharaoh's number 2 man. But his word is respected. It carries the weight of Pharaoh himself's authority, and so when he orders everyone to leave and he makes himself known privately to his brothers, he just had that power, and it was for a purpose. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians of the house of Pharaoh heard it. This is the third of the fifth time we read that Joseph weeps for his brothers. On earlier occasions, we read that he weeps for just finding out for who they were. There was this bad blood between them. They had thrown him into a ditch to be killed, and it wasn't until the intervention of Judah, who also acts as Benjamin's protector, I forget what I was going at. We're just going to read the third verse. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were unable to answer him, for they trembled before him. So they knew that this Pharaoh's number 2, this figure of authority and prominence, is in fact their brother, the one who they had discarded to die and ultimately settled for enslaving them, had risen from the slave chains to the prison to the palace, and as Pharaoh's right-hand man. And he says, is Joseph my father? That would have been their father, so they would have known that who he was. And he hasn't said his name yet, but they can infer that this is the brother they had discarded, and now his dream is fulfilled. The prophecy they are living in, they are bowing down. They are at his mercy on food and for their security and their freedom to pass through, to make it out of Egypt alive for having gone down there to get food. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. And when they came near, he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. So he tells them, I am Joseph. Remember me, the brother you had, the one you wanted to get rid of because you were so envious of the father's favoritism that you sold me in Egypt. Here I am in Egypt. Here you are too. And, you may have sold me into slavery, but I am a ruler now. I have fulfilled the promise of the dream in the 37th chapter where you are bowing down before me. But what's important here also is he mentions his name. So they're frightened when they know that he knows their father's name, but he hasn't told his own name yet until now. And then they remember he's the one who they had discarded for death. Now he's in a position to crush them. But what's he going to do is the big mystery. And now do not be grieved nor displeased with yourselves, because you sold me here. For Elohim sent me before you to preserve life. So he's quashing any nerve or anxiety or fear in them that he is motivated by vengeance or revengeance, because he knew that he did an awful thing. But in spite of it, he had prospered, and he was not going to use his power, authority, and success to get rid of their lives, but he was there to save lives, and that's what he did to the people all around them by preparing this agricultural storage, which enabled the civilizations of the ancient Near East to sustain itself through this period of severe famines. Famines were an occasional fact of life, but a severely unpleasant one in the ancient world. And he was there as the Abrahamic blessing, and I just want to quote something that I recently read. This is in reference to Abraham, and remember I said Joseph is the fulfillment of this. So these are the words of Brian McLaren from his book, A New Kind of Christianity, 10 Questions That Are Transforming the Faith. I'm in a Christian literature group, and we're reading and discussing this book right now. One of the quotes I came across was, God calls Abraham and Sarah and imbues them with a new identity as the father and mother of a nation who will be blessed in order to bring blessings to all nations. It is absolutely essential to notice what God is doing, not damning and rejecting all nations and exempting one from damnations, not hating all nations and loving one, not privileging one superior nation to conquer and rule all the others, but blessing all nations through one, choosing one to bring benefit to all. So we witness a fulfillment and the manifestation of this Abrahamic promise ideal. We witness his grandson saving all the nations from death, from perishing through famine, much as the one that the ultimate Abrahamic blessing, Yahshua Messiah, preserves us from death of sin. But for 2 years now, the famine of food has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there is neither plowing nor harvesting. So they're at the 2 year mark of what comes to pass is going to last 7 years. They're going to be stretched thin, but they are going to make it through the prudent planning of Joseph. He has preserved just enough food to keep a civilization from starving. And Elohim sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in that earth, to give life to you by a great escape. So they tried to kill him, and this was all part of the providential plan to give life to them. So they tried to get rid of him. They wanted him gone. They wanted him killed. They're going to fail, and he is going to go through the ringer to give them life. So he does not abuse his exalted position at their expense. He is not vengeance minded. What would he have done? He would have ruined the nation of Israel, and it wouldn't have had the 12 tribes as we know him if he had acted other than he did here. So this was all part of a providential plan, and Joseph knew it, and he was not going to crush his former enemies, even though they were brothers of his own household. He was not going to take revenge. He wasn't mad at them. He knew that the path of affliction and adversity taught him everything that was necessary for him to know at this juncture in his life. So then, you did not send me here, but Elohim, and he has appointed me for a father to Pharaoh, and master of all his house, and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. So he's saying that they did not send him here. They kind of did in slaves, but ultimately it was the direction and the providential hand of Elohim who sent him there through their inactions. That does not mean Elohim is morally responsible for enslaving his own brother. It means that he used the moral irresponsibility in his providential manipulation to bring a wonderful thing to pass. And you know, he's an advisor to the Pharaoh. That's what a father would have meant, and a master of all his house. He was second to Pharaoh himself. He carried the pharaonic authority himself, and his authority was everywhere throughout the kingdom. He had earned the trust for his excellency and competency of the man, the servant, whose servant he was, the Pharaoh. Hurry and go up to my father, and say to him, Thus said your son Joseph, Elohim has made me master of all the Egyptians. Come down to me, do not delay. So Jacob, he was the one who loved Joseph above all the others, and so much so that he claimed he would never smile again when he heard news of his death. But now he's alive, and this is going to be news to him, because right now he's worried about just having enough food to survive, because he's in this desert wasteland that did not have Joseph to interpret a dream that was prophecy and revelation that a famine would come to pass for 7 years. So they've been out of food for some 2 years now. They're just gradually making their way down because they got the silos and they got the storages in Egypt. And they're going to keep not only their own nation alive, but all those around it alive too. And it's all through the prudent planning of this one man who had the prophecy and the revelation. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, Elohim has made me master of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. So he's using his authority to tell him to get up, pack up your stuff, come down to the palace. You're with me now. I have the food and I have the protection that's going to keep our nation alive, because right now you're a tribe of 12 sons and a father who do not have food. They're contending with a famine. I got it all taken care of. I got it all under wraps down here. Get up, come to me. Your family will be alive, not only alive, but flourish because of the patronage of the Pharaoh whose trust I've earned. And you shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. The land of Goshen was to the northeast of the northern Egypt, so this would have been primal pastoral land, and the Egyptians considered the pastoral trade to be dirty and undignified, so the Israelites did provide a function that they were unwilling or unable to provide themselves, and eventually they were enslaved. But that's where they settled. They came down with 70 people, then they grew too big to be in a nation, and that takes us ultimately into another chapter, or all the way to Exodus. But For a while, they did have the trust and protection and patronage of the Pharaoh. He saw no threat. He had literally saved his nation, not only his nation, but all the ones around him. So he was not worried about a threat. But what happened when a new Pharaoh, most likely a native dynasty, so the one, Amos the First, the one who founded the new kingdom of Egypt, was in all likelihood the one who knew not Joseph. And I shall provide for you there, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, because 5 years of famine of food are still to come. So they're still at the 2-year point of a 7-year famine, the 7 years of which he had predicted through Pharaoh's dream when he saw the 7 corn stills in the farmer's field, 7 of which were abundant, 7 of which that was one of the dreams, but in any case, they both signified the 7 years of abundance. They had a fat cow, and then 7 sickly cows. So there were 7 fat cows and 7 sickly ones, and this translated into 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine. But already the famine is tearing the world around them apart at this time. So it was through the prudent planning of Joseph that they are preserved intact. And look, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. His brother Benjamin would have been his younger brother of the same mother, so the reason Joseph was so highly esteemed was he was the firstborn of Rachel, who was the true apple of his eye. Leah sired the first 4. I think Judah was the one praised because she had a moment for praise when he came. But and you shall inform my father of all my esteem in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. So he's telling them as a brother and also a figure of authority. He's giving them essentially the order to bring him down right now. He's telling them to waste no time. So he's not asking them to. He's pretty much telling them to. And he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. So this is the 4th of the 5th time we read that Joseph wept over his brother. Benjamin would have been the son who died in the childbirth of Joseph's own mother, so really they were all that was left of the apple of Jacob's eye, and Benjamin would be the younger tribe, and their territory would be amalgamated within the kingdom of Judah, and also Benjamin, from his loins would Saul spring, and also Saul of Tarsus. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers spoke with him. So this is where we're going to wrap up today. We could take this further, but we're not willing to risk it because there's 28 verses. We're 15 deep, but this does mark a fitting conclusion because once more he's kissing all his brothers and weeping over them, and that concludes their conversation. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.